Session with Dr. Farid Holakouee.
Good afternoon. Welcome to In Session. I'm your host, Dr. Farid Holakouee, and I'll be with you for the next 2 hours here on Radio Hamra. It has been a little while since I've done a live show. I was traveling with my wife Pega and our son Keon, visiting my wife's family in Copenhagen, and it was a very nice visit. Nice to be back as well, but yeah, I had a great time, and I talk a bit about some things related to that, and also our son Keon had his first birthday just a few days ago, which is kind of hard to believe. I know every parent I talk to shares the same experience, and you can't believe how fast it goes. But yeah, I really am. I'm feeling that, and so I might talk about that later on. I want to start the show talking about Iran and the situation, and not getting into all the details of what's going on and what's not happening and all that, but just really, yeah, it's kind of sad. I don't even know where to begin to see that what has been going on from the beginning is the people of Iran have been often forgotten or not been the ones at the forefront, even though we hoped that there was going to be some changes that would lead to betterments for the people of Iran and lead to the end of the regime, but we're not there, at least not yet. Now, I talk to different people, and people are saying, there's cracks or things happening, and I'm not here to comment on exactly what's going on because I'm not informed enough to give that impression. So I'm hopeful that there will be the end of the Islamic Republic and the people of Iran will have freedom. I don't know when. Hopefully it's just when, not if, but when that will happen. But it has been sad that the people of Iran again are being, I don't want to say forgotten, but not as much, the attention isn't there as much as it was a little bit ago. And from the beginning, they were the ones suffering and paying the price, and they're the ones that continue to suffer. They've suffered at the hands of the regime for more than 47 years, and then they had to suffer through wars that did kill people and also just devastate and scare and put a lot of stress and burden on the people of Iran. Also economically, things have gone worse. The internet has been cut for over 2 months. It's just so many hardships that the people of Iran have been forced to endure. And they are the real, I don't want to just say victims to paint them in that way, but really they're the ones that are paying the price for everything that is going on. And I kind of took a social media break myself, but I hope we can still do whatever we can to keep the people of Iran, not just in our thoughts, but actually put it out there so people are just aware of what's happening to the people of Iran. Because, as I said, it would be sad to just have them be forgotten in all of this, which I think is often what happens, is that the people in power are doing what's in their best interest, but the people don't necessarily get what they truly deserve or what they want. So, yeah, it's been sad, and I'm also just reminded of the types of conversations we've had, and sometimes with some time and perspective, I hope we can recognize how much, when we talk about these things a lot about what should happen and what is going to happen, and as the case in general, but especially online, everyone was so certain that they knew this is what should happen, or this is exactly what's going to happen or needs to happen, or, oh, this is definitely good, or this is definitely bad, or whatever it might be. And I think it's probably safe to say that most people could say they weren't at least 100% accurate on everything they've predicted. And because of that, we can have that humility to recognize we don't know about these things. And so even though being certain feels good, even though being certain sounds good, and if you're on social media, being certain gets way more attention than not being certain, I just hope people can realize how complex these situations are. And if you think you know everything, or you think every way that things are going to happen, you really don't. You don't know what's going on. So I hope that when we continue the conversations or we continue mobilizing action or doing whatever we have to do, we keep these things in mind because, um, we have been and we continue to be way too divided to even support the people in Iran, which is all we can do. I've mentioned this in posts I put online, but at times I would put one post or one story, I should say, and I would get messages from people saying you are pro regime and also people saying you're pro war from the same message, which should be two opposing sides. But because people are so black and white and see things that if either you are so against something that everything's bad about it and everything against them is good, or vice versa, that leaves no room for someone to consider all sides of things or be more aware of the complexity of it. You could be against the Islamic Republic wholeheartedly, which I am, but that doesn't mean that no matter what happens in Iran, I'm okay with that to end the Islamic Republic. If, for example, many, more people were dying and more damage was being done to the country and to the people in a variety of ways, I wouldn't say that it's definitely a good thing. But people have been so black and white that I've heard people say, it doesn't matter. Whatever happens, you hear about a bombing, you hear about a bridge, you hear about a school, whatever it is, it's still okay. It's still good because it's leading to the end of the regime. And I could understand that wanting the end of the regime, but we can't turn a blind eye to everything else. We can't look at it so black and white that we don't actually pay attention to what is going on. And so I think most of the conversation, as is often the case, especially online, is not conversation. We're talking past each other or against each other rather than with each other to try to really get a better sense of understanding or communication or consensus, come together more about what is happening. And in a way, how sad, one, that we don't do better to support the people who are suffering in Iran. So we should keep that in mind. And two, that they're the ones that are suffering and going through this, and we can be so fixated on proving ourselves right, attacking other people, feeling good, getting likes and follows and whatever comes with it in social media. That is really a sad thing to see, and we have to be real with ourselves that we can all get sucked into focusing on the wrong things. We're talking about people's lives and livelihoods and well-being and rights and everything that truly matters, and we can get caught up in the game of making a good point, going viral, having a hot take or whatever it is that we think feels good. But it is good to have that perspective. Look at what's actually going on. Look who is actually suffering and paying the price, and we should be embarrassed if we don't pay attention to those sides of things or make that the focal point or the focus. So I think it's important to keep that in mind in any situation. Politics is very divisive, very polarized, and people are talking about things, and that becomes almost like their job or at least a hobby or part of what they do. But we're always talking about people's lives at the end of the day. So don't just focus on your posts. Yes, make the best posts you can, whatever that means, as far as being honest, being truthful, presenting things that you think are important. But the reaction you get, you have to be very careful not to get sucked into paying attention to that for multiple reasons. One, because of what you put, but also we know that the things that go more viral in general, of course, sometimes it could be good content that might go viral or get attention, but often it is the things that are more divisive, more nasty, more, let's say verbally aggressive or spreading hate even and division are unfortunately things that get more attention and are more likely to go viral online. So if we're drawn by that, if we're trying to make that happen, you'll likely make content that is not beneficial at all, most importantly to the people of Iran and just in general. So I'm just seeing the discussions online, and there's less discussion online. It was really all everyone was talking about for a while, and now it's gone away more, not completely, but definitely receded, which is unfortunately often the case. that some people are suffering and it becomes the focus, and how can you not be talking about it? And then the people are still suffering in any way, you probably say worse in a lot of ways. Um, but then it's not talked about anymore. And that's kind of, unfortunately, the news cycle and the human cycle of how things can go. So yeah, I'm still very sad for the people in Iran. You talk to people and trying to get in touch with their family in Iran. When we're in Denmark, my wife's family, trying to get in touch with some of her family, just nearly impossible. And that's sad to begin with. And then when, at times bombs are going on and you hear a bomb has gone off close to their city or their hometown, it's terrifying, and you can't get in contact with them. And that's just for the people outside of Iran. Imagine what they're, going through in Iran. So it's been very, heartbreaking to see what is happening. I still, have hope, not that, because I know it's going to happen, but I'm trying to be hopeful of what can happen, but definitely not trying to minimize what is happening to the people of Iran and what they're continuing to endure. Of course, the internet shutdown is horrible, but on top of that, the executions have been happening at a very high rate. And as much as possible to try to keep that in the darkness. But it is happening. You're just hearing news almost every day of executions of often very young individuals who almost definitely are innocent. And, their lives being lost and the devastation to their families is just very, very sad to see. And as I said, I don't know how things will go, but I hope things will be better soon for the people of Iran. And again, I hope all of us outside of Iran could remember how sure you might have felt, let's say, a month ago, 2 months ago about something, and just keep that in mind, that you probably were sure. I think almost all of us were probably more certain about things than we should have been. And all of us can realize that we're totally wrong about some things, and how many of us probably attacked people who disagreed with us, to think, how stupid can you be, or how immoral can you be, or how whatever it is you can be to think that way. And probably we can see that was a little bit, at least misleading, but at worst, even really immoral or unethical to talk or to say those things. So it's never too late to never too late to change your mind, for sure, and never too late to either take back or walk back what you've said. And, sometimes when people change their mind, people call them a flip-flopper or say you don't have integrity or you said this. But with new information and with time and with perspective, it makes sense for your views to change or to evolve. That it would actually be bad if it never changed, no matter what, information came out. But a lot of times people think, oh, I stick to my guns. I stay true to what I said, as some kind of strength, which, yes, it can be good, of course, to have integrity about things. But with new information, sticking to the same beliefs is not actually something to be proud of. So I think we all can swallow some, humility, and recognize that if you recognize things are different, don't be afraid to voice that, because it's going to take you out of the conversation. I think a lot of people might feel like they shouldn't say anything anymore. They don't want to because of things they said before. They're taking down their posts from before because of what they said. Now, maybe you should take down something if you were so certain and you're realizing that was not helpful. I think a lot of people realize they have to walk back things they thought they were so sure of, because, it turns out it was not so simple. These things are not ever simple. They're never black and white. Unfortunately, the human tendency is to go towards black and white thinking because it's much more comfortable. It's easier. It feels better just to, have this sense of, okay, this is all good or all bad, or it's all this way or that way, is a lot easier than sitting with the discomfort of it's this and that. It's not black or white. It's actually gray and more complicated than that. And most importantly, thinking of the people of Iran and recognizing that they're the ones who are carrying the burden. They're the ones that are suffering and have continued to suffer for 47 years, and wishing for the best for them. And we can all remember that it's about them, what they want, what their lives have become, what we hope they become, not about any of us outside of Iran. Okay, let's go to our first commercial break. We'll be right back. Welcome back. As I mentioned at the top of the show, uh, was gone, was in my wife's family together with our son, which was really nice. Seeing him surrounded by family and love every day there. And he also turned 1 year old just a few days ago, which is still hard for me to wrap my head around. And so I wanted to talk a bit about that feeling of um, the experiences of being a father and of going through this incredible experience, really the best experience of my life, something I'm so grateful for every single day. And yeah, everything that comes with it. One thing about that passage of time, it's interesting how time, we think of it as this objective thing, which it is, and how we measure it or how we communicate with one another. But our experience of time, of course, is subjective and doesn't necessarily follow this sense that the amount of time feels the same. One day doesn't always feel like one day, or 1 month doesn't feel like the same length of time, depending on what happens. One thing we know is that the more new things that happen or new experiences that we have, the time will feel like it goes more slowly, or almost a sense that it feels like more happened. So the feeling is it's been more time. Uh, and so I've had so many of these experiences where I go somewhere. I remember being kind of in college, and I'd go to these camps where you'd work with some kids, and so much would happen. And I would always have the same experience. It'd be like 5, 6 days. And when it would get to the last day, I would have both the feeling that I can't believe it's over. It feels like it's gone by so fast. But also, if I thought back to the day before we started, or when we first started, it felt like so long ago. It felt like more than 5, 6 days ago. And that's the same feeling I have with Keon now, that I can't believe he's a year old. And it was very emotional for me, just thinking about that and experiencing that and seeing that. And also, some people say, oh, they're no longer a baby, they're a toddler. And you're like, I can't believe, my baby's no longer a baby, and all those kinds of things. So in some ways, I can't believe how fast it's been. And it's just, I can't believe that part. But then if I also think of before he was born, it feels like a long time ago. I mean, it also feels like a long time ago because it's hard to remember life without him, because he's such a big part, the biggest part of every day now. So it's hard to remember. That almost feels like a different person. And in some ways, it is almost like a different person that I was before I had him. So there's that way, but also just so many experiences that we've had. It feels like so long ago, he came in. So it's this interesting paradox of feeling like time went by so fast, or you can't believe how much time has passed, but also feeling like it was a long, long time ago, thinking back on things. And yeah, a birthday or anniversary of things, it's always a time to reflect. And so I definitely did a lot of that. We were kind of putting some things together for the birthday. So we looked through pictures of, different every month, basically. And so I was going through, my phone is just thousands of pictures and videos of him. So we're going through so many of them. And it was just interesting seeing him at different ages and realizing how, I'm like, oh yeah, I remember him, and how, he looks the same but different. Or, you can tell it's him, but he looks different. Or I think I thought he looked, even bigger, but then you look and he's so small. It's just some interesting things to go back and look at that. But what's also interesting is that seeing more and more of his personality now. There is this feeling of, I can kind of see it there too, which is kind of, maybe I can kind of explain what I mean, is that I could look back at, pictures or videos of him when he was a few months old, and I can kind of see the signs of his personality that are more clear now. But I could realize that some of that is me, also in hindsight now, almost like not projecting, but putting those things onto the past where maybe they weren't so clear then. So, you might see him act in a certain way, like, oh yeah, that's so him. But back then it was hard to know that, that was kind of who he was going to become. But with hindsight, it seems obvious that those things were there, which is also, I was talking about time, but what we know, that memory is definitely very subjective. Or not this type of tape recorder of things. I've heard this a lot of times, especially sometimes with like self-help or cults or certain movements that try to, make it seem like life is so simpler, they have life figured out. You'll often hear this notion that your memory is like a tape recorder and you can go back and, replay any part you want. And sometimes, there's techniques that they're teaching you to do that. Or if you talk to the guru or the leader or the spiritual, whatever, they'll kind of allow you to do that. But, what we understand about memory, that's not the case. It's not this tape recorder that records every single thing, or is like, the fidelity is not perfect to be that whatever you experienced, you can definitely remember it accurately and truthfully. That's not the case. It's definitely not that. And so we could experience things and you go back and think, it was one thing when maybe it wasn't that. I've actually heard a lot of parents say, and I can get it now that is a year old, that sometimes it's almost like your memory tricks you or you forget how hard those early months are, so that you have a kid again, just like you want to experience it again. And then you go through it and you realize like, oh yeah, this is pretty tough. So it's almost like you trick yourself. And we know we could definitely do this where when you experience something, you might have been feeling something, but then when you look back on that experience, you might feel differently about it or have a different feeling about it. They even so I say this about, you go on a vacation, sometimes while you were there, maybe you're stressful or tired, or, you had some experiences, but then you look at pictures of it and it's like, oh, what a great time, or that looks great, which is also sometimes we experience with other people. People post a picture of themselves in front of a beautiful site and you think, wow, what a life they're living. But you don't know how happy or unhappy they were around what happened there. Just one picture can't tell you about an actual experience or what they're experiencing in the longer term, which is why I've always taken issue to when people post couple goals and it's like a picture. And I get it, something can look cool or look good or look beautiful or look whatever, but it gives you no indication of what it's actually like to be in the relationship for those individuals. So that the couple goals, it really it can be fun, but it doesn't mean much, and we should never assume we know what it's like for the individuals in a relationship. If it's something we would want or admirable or enviable, because we don't know. And a lot of times, couples that can look good or pictures that can look good could be happening in a relationship that is really miserable and unhappy. But I definitely digress there. But yeah, looking through the pictures and videos is interesting. Remembering things, or you just would remember what it was like, during that time parenting him, and things that you go through. So yeah, that's been interesting. Looking at the memories, reflecting on things, realizing that as best as I try, I'm going to remember things differently than they actually happened. That's just always part of this life. I've had this experience so many times working with couples in therapy where they will talk about an argument they had. And of course, there could be reasons behind why they might remember things differently, but sometimes it'll be so different, their recollections of an argument they had just 2 days ago. They'll be shocked and even accuse the other person of lying or trying to be untruthful or trying to, even manipulate me as the therapist to see their side. And again, it doesn't mean those things never happen, but far more often, it's just people will remember the same experience very, very differently, for so many reasons. What they paid attention to, also what's happened in the meantime, and how they remember things. Just so many things will impact that. But also sharing the experience with my wife, it's been obviously nice to talk about things and see how, what we remember, what we experienced along the way. But yeah, the experience of time and the memories has been interesting, just reflecting and really realizing that life is so different now, than it was before. And truly, as I mentioned before, you really do become a different person when you become a parent. In really some very fundamental ways, because our identity, sometimes we think of like, who am I? We think it's like this one core thing, this essence. And, maybe there's something, that's why people will talk about a soul, or religions will talk about a soul. We think there's something there. And I think there's a way that someone makes us feel. I've used this term like an emotional signature, which is kind of like what maybe we think of as a soul, but it's the way they make us feel. I don't think it actually means they have to have something fundamental or an essence, but we feel something around them, in our experience. with them. So I think that to me is more what is there rather than there has to be something, tangibly that is there. But going back to who am I, our identity is a complex thing. You can be, I am a man. For example, for myself, I'm a psychologist. I'm Iranian American. I am a son. I'm so many things, and how much those things matter to me and my identity can be different from person to person. So for two different people, let's say someone else is a psychologist, it might be a much bigger or much smaller part of their identity or how they see themselves compared to me. So, on paper, we could be the same. We could both be, let's say, Iranian American psychologists, but those three things, Iranian American or even combination Iranian American psychologists, we might feel very differently about how they identify us, or maybe we don't even see some aspect of that as part of our identity. So identity being so complex, when you take on another role and a big role, like becoming a father, becoming a husband or a wife, it does fundamentally change who you are in that way. First, it's a big part of it can be, I should say, like as I was saying, it's different for different people of your identity. And so for right now, for me, it's such a big part of how I see myself and who I see myself as and what my experience is, that I do feel like a very different person than I was just a little over a year ago, before I became a father. So there really are those, in that way, my identity has changed. And also I've changed in just the way I feel and experience life. He is so much at the forefront of what I'm thinking about constantly. Even when I'm doing this show, he'll pop into my head so many times. Of course, when I'm talking about him very directly, it's going to be in my head. But even when I'm not, I think about him. You worry about certain things, or you're concerned about something, or you want to make sure he's okay, or you're thinking about some next thing that you need to do for him or with him. But I definitely feel like a very different person in that some of my brain, my psyche, so much of what I am thinking about and reflecting on revolves around him. I know they talk about like mom brain, but I think, it's just parent brain. I think the mom is even more preoccupied because of the primary connection that they have, and especially if you're breastfeeding, and so much more even is dependent on the mom. But I think parents in general, there is this shift in just how you think about things or experience things, because now you're so preoccupied with, before you just have to take care of yourself and make sure you're okay. But when you have this dependent being on you, this being that is dependent on you, it's obviously going to lead to a big change in how you think and how much of you is available for everything else. So there really are these ways that I feel definitely like a different person. It's still me, which is interesting. Kind of like I was saying, this essence, maybe I'm saying something to that effect. There's still, so much of who I am, but I've definitely changed a lot as well. And life experience is very, very different than it was before. And I'm so grateful for that change and all the changes. Life is, there's more anxiety, more things you worry about or think about. You sleep less. There's a lot of things that you definitely experience that are not at times pleasant, or things that you'd want to experience. But I think, as any parent would say, you wouldn't trade it for the world. You'll take all of that in a heartbeat. Some nights I'm sleeping, not so good, or there's been nights where I had to, hold him, or something comes up where I'm just, kind of, you're stuck and you can't sleep as much. But then you're just like, this is still so great. I'm so lucky. I don't mean, I'm not trying to put some idealized view of it, that it's so easy. It's really hard, the sleeplessness and the things that you experience. So it's not to just paint this rosy picture that it's so simple. It's really, really hard and challenging, and you go through a lot, but definitely worth it. And so after the break, I want to continue on some of these themes of parenthood, now that I've been a parent for a year. And I'm sure people are listening like, oh, I have 4 kids and I've been a parent for 40 years. So I know I'm not speaking as a seasoned veteran, but just sharing some of my experiences of what it's been like so far. So let's go to another commercial break. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Was talking the last segment about being a dad for a year now. Keon just having his birthday. And I thought, why not go back to the start? Let me just share from the beginning, becoming a dad, what that's been like. And I've talked about this throughout the year. Would also be interesting, even just for myself, is seeing how my perspective maybe has changed, or things have changed over the year, or maybe the same periods. If I talk about the beginning, what I think about it now. And so I'm saying I've been a dad for a year now, but really it starts before that. I mean, first I can just say wanting to be a dad, which is something I always knew I wanted to do, to get married, have a wife, and then have kids. There's always something that I was very certain about. I definitely wanted. So, becoming a dad, of course, there's a moment you become a dad when you have your child, but it starts before that. Before that time, you're thinking about um, what that even means. What does it mean to become a father? What does it mean to you? Or at least what do you think then? You won't know until you actually experience it. But yeah, I remember always wanting to have that experience, and thinking about that experience or what it would be like. And it was always a pleasant thing. I mean, as I started to realize how hard it could be, also, I think there was an anxiety that came with it too, but still a desire for that, to be a dad and to have that experience. And I became a father a little bit later in life. Um, and I think in some ways it's made me even more grateful, because you realize that it doesn't have to happen, or doesn't happen to everyone. So I'm very grateful that I've had this experience um, thus far. And so going back to that beginning, also, um, even just I was talking about before, having the kid yourself, but before you see your baby, going through the pregnancy experience. And of course, I have to be very careful as I say that. My wife, the one going through pregnancy, I was just her partner, her support, but she was one that actually had to go through everything, and seeing what she goes through or went through, and what women go through in pregnancy, and then childbirth, and then after the child is born, with recovery and breastfeeding and everything. You realize, I mean, I know this is going to sound like so cliche, or something that a lot of men maybe sometimes try to say these things and get a lot of credit, but really it's true, that moms don't get enough credit. Or when a baby or a child just loves their mom so much, you're like, they really should. The mom has gone through so much for them. You just can't even compare it to what dad can do, or will do. So yeah, that's one thing, is seeing my wife go through pregnancy. The whole time, people talk about morning sickness, which is really a bad name, I think, because one, it doesn't happen just in morning, the nausea and the vomiting. And also some people say, oh, it's just at the beginning. But, my wife went through that for most of the pregnancy. So it was really, really, really challenging. But yeah, that whole experience was it's a lot, going through the doctor's appointments. And something I would remember during the doctor's appointments, each time you go and you're doing a checkup, and, I actually I knew, if you asked me, that you could get some kind of bad news at this doctor's appointment. Every time you go in, there could be either the worst, that the baby is no longer with us, and, you won't be having a baby, to some kind of medical concern or issue that the baby could have, or concerns about how the pregnancy is going. So I knew that was there, but I almost was in, not, I want to say denial. Maybe it's like an avoidance kind of a thing, but I just wouldn't think of it as like, I kind of just had this optimism. And, usually avoidance or denial, and by the way, I'll share my experience, and I don't want to in any way, I'll talk about it. Maybe sometimes I'll talk about what I think of what I even did or experienced, but by no means should you take what I'm saying as this is what you should do, or, I did it right. I definitely don't have some kind of blueprint or recipe for how to do these things. I'll just share some of my experiences. But so I say, even with this, I don't know if it's definitely the right thing, but what I experienced was, I would kind of not think about the negative, even though I knew it's possible, it was there. And so usually avoidance or denial is a bad thing, and in general it can be. But there are times when it's actually not so bad. It can actually be a good coping mechanism. Related to what I'm saying, one of the examples that always comes to my mind is, you go take a medical test. Like, okay, we have to do a biopsy to see if you have cancer or not. And easier said than done. But if you could, from the time you do the biopsy to the time you get the results, not think about it, it's actually probably a good thing, because there's nothing you can do. Avoidance and denial are really, really bad when we avoid something that we can take action on. So, not even going in to take the scan, for example, that could be a type of avoidance where it's like, you could have a problem, but you don't want to, you're too afraid to face the problem or to face the possibility of the problem or all those things. So you avoid taking action. That's really problematic. Or other things, in our life, you realize you're having some kind of issue in life, or you realize, let's say your kid is having an issue where you don't want to face it and you avoid it. That's problematic because you can and should take action that would either, if there is a problem, be able to address it, make things better and not let them get worse, or maybe you even realize there isn't such a problem and you can have peace of mind, but you're kind of avoiding really facing it. So usually it causes us problems when we avoid things when we can do something. But when you're just waiting, you take the tests and you have to wait. There's nothing you need to do in that meantime. You can't start planning for treatment or start planning for anything because you don't even know. So you really just need to pass that time, get through that time to then find out the result, and then you can make a decision and move forward. So in that kind of instant, if you can distract yourself, you say, I'm going to go watch a movie or watch a show or hang out with friends or do something that will distract me from thinking about it because you might get preoccupied with it. That's a really good thing. So here is also the same in some level, that type of avoidance or denial. It wasn't, I don't think it was necessarily bad for that reason because there wasn't really something I needed to do. If, worst case scenario, we did get some bad news, then yes, I would obviously have to face it and deal with it head on. But before that point, to get stuck in worrying about, because I could have done that. Okay, 3-month scan. What are all the things that can go wrong here? And I really didn't even do that at all. Get informed. So maybe there's something there. You could be more informed to be prepared for something. But I really realized that I would just be too worried about things, or it could make me freak out more. So it's probably better not to. But yeah, you go in and then they're kind of looking, once you have the heartbeat, looking for the heartbeat or looking for the baby. And there is a bit of this anxiety of what are they going to see, because you don't know. And it's like this very fragile, delicate little thing in there. And you're just caring so much about it, but just it's out of your hands. You just do everything you can. And my wife did amazing taking care of herself throughout the pregnancy, and I try to support her in that. But a lot of it is out of your hands. So there's like that. I remember that feeling of just like you feel like almost like your heart stops, or you kind of like you're holding your breath to see what do they say. Like, okay, oh, there's the head. Oh, And we were very lucky that there was just good news, or in the sense no news as far as like nothing bad to report. But yeah, it was always this bit of anxiety, like what's there, what's not there, how are things going? But going into it, I'd always try to kind of have this just going in like it's a checkup and there's nothing, nothing bad is going to happen. But I would always have that realization, even before, during, after, that we were very lucky. Each time we'd go in, there was nothing significant to note. One time there was something where they thought there was some kind of mass, something in his stomach, and they kind of, and it told us, okay, there's something like likely it's nothing. Even if there is something there, like some kind of mass, it'll just pass at some point, or get rid of it. But still, like, there was just minutes of. Then the doctor came back to recheck and thought that, it looks like it's just a shadow that picked up on the sonogram, but not actually something that's there, and kept saying, I can't find it. So it probably was just a shadow that showed up in the image. And we were relieved. But I think we actually did a follow-up, if I recall, to just make sure. But yeah, even in those minutes, I remember this heartbreaking, we were sad, we were worried. And you feel so bad for this, delicate, fragile being in there who's just can't do anything, and do they have some kind of pain or issue or something, or is going to be something once he's born, or can it even be worse than that? But yeah, it was a bit scary, and that was really the worst of it. So we were very, very lucky. And so that's what I was going to share, is how grateful and lucky I felt, knowing that at every phase, even the first just getting pregnant, which that's one thing, and then every phase of the pregnancy, so many families, really millions have gotten bad news at that step. And so your gratitude for what you have really explodes. Like, I'm so grateful that we're fortunate enough not to have some bad news here, because we could have gone bad news today. We didn't. So we were very, very lucky that the pregnancy did go smoothly. As I said, even getting pregnant, I've worked with so many families in therapy, trying to get pregnant, so many women trying to get pregnant, and having challenges. And so, yeah, even that part we were lucky. And then, um, the whole pregnancy, it was very, very fortunate for us. But yeah, it's just, you're just anxious, you're nervous each time you go in, not knowing what you're going to hear, and hoping really you don't hear anything, as in no bad news, just okay, everything looks good, let's move on. But we know that people haven't been so lucky. So I feel very lucky and fortunate that was our experience, and that's what we went through. And then, childbirth itself, what an experience. We did a course together, my wife and I, which really it was more about the husbands. And again, it's called the Bradley method, but I'm not endorsing it as like the way to go, but I felt that it was helpful. And we did some online classes, or some things for my wife, things you could do, exercises, but a lot of it was in helping the father be more prepared to play their support role, their coaching role, whatever you want to call it, as best as possible. And I recognize how important that is, because, of course, the woman in labor is going through everything, and she is going to be able to tell you what her body needs or what it's going through. So, of course, that's primary. However, because of what they're going through, they could benefit from having someone who can also help in making the decisions, or ask for things, or keep an eye on things, because they're so preoccupied with the process of birthing, which makes sense. That it's going to be harder for them to be involved with administrative things, or request something, or even remember to drink something, or whatever it is that they need in that process. It could be helpful to have someone who could be that for them, be their advocate, be their support, and to be informed on what that is. And so it was also helpful for us, because we, through the class and through our discussions, got to have a clear sense of what we wanted birth to be like, as much as possible. It's definitely one of those things where the cliche of you make a plan and God laughs kind of a thing, where you have this ideal way of everything going a certain way, but that's it's not going to go as smoothly as you would hope, or everything's not going to go as well as you'd like. But yeah, we got to have a real clear sense of what we wanted and didn't want, especially what my wife wanted and didn't want, so I could be that advocate for her as much as possible. I'm sure I could have done better, but I hope it was helpful for her to have me there, to be able to advocate for her. And it was a long process. I know you see like TV shows or movies where they kind of have like the mom joking, or not joking, but kind of say, "Oh, I was in labor for like 50 hours," or these like stories. But you really see it's probably not that exaggerated. Maybe 50 hours is like that's, I'm sure, very, very rare. But yeah, it was a long, long process, and again, makes you admire moms for what they go through. I remember one of my friends who had twins a few years ago, but she said that after the experience, it made her just look at every human being and be like, "Oh my God, some woman went through all that for you, for you to be born. It was all of that," because it's such a process. And yeah, you really see that. Then you just think, "Oh, people have a baby and they have a baby now." But then when you see what it actually takes to go through it, to actually make it happen, you see that it's no small thing. It's really a big deal. So I was incredibly, I want to say proud first, which I was, but even inspired by my wife for what she went through. And even actually, every woman going through it is incredible, but the nursing staff were very impressed by her. One of the nurses in particular was so impressed, and we kind of stayed in touch with her after and sent her a message of thank you, because she was just saying I was amazed with how good she was, and all of that. So yeah, very, very grateful to my wife for what she endured, and how she endured it to bring our baby into this world. And then on May 10th of 2025, we got baby Keon, who didn't have his name quite set yet until I think it was the 12th that we officially gave him that name. So he was just baby Holakouee for a couple of days. But yeah, just seeing what she went through, I was just so impressed. And again, even there was challenges, there were complications. It wasn't easy, but so many women and so many babies face a lot of things during that process. So again, I was grateful there that even though it was not easy for sure for my wife and everything she had to go through, but all in all, we were lucky that there was nothing catastrophic that happened on that day, as unfortunately many people have experienced in the past and still do. So I was talking about fatherhood, and I just only got up to the birth of the baby. So we'll continue on these themes of what it's been like, what the experience has been like for me after the break. We'll be right back. I'm talking about the journey of fatherhood, reflecting on this first year and the last time I got up until the birth of our baby Keon, and the experience in the hospital. I won't even get too much into that because I know there's a lot of these memes or jokes out there like the dad definitely shouldn't complain because of what the mom has gone through. But those first few days there was really a blur. I even can remember. I mean, I was talking about memory, so I don't know how much I can say I remember, but I do kind of remember the first time he cried. We finally went to sleep that first night. The first time he cried, and I went to him, and I didn't even know what can I do? And I picked him up, and I was trying to soothe him. But yeah, it's just so interesting. You kind of just sprung into action, and now you're trying to take care of this beautiful, fragile little baby without really knowing, especially as a first time parent, what you're doing and just trying your best. But you kind of find your way, or make your way through all of that, changing his diaper, and just trying to make sure you don't hurt him, but take care of him. Yeah, it was what an experience. And actually, I did want to go back. I know I mentioned I got to the birth, but I talked about this on my show way back then because people even I talked to some people and had differing opinions, which to me always surprised me. But differing opinion about even being in the room with my wife, where I think it's more of a traditional thing. But some men even told me, no, you shouldn't. You shouldn't be there. It's not good. It's different things. It's too much. Maybe the man shouldn't be in the room, or different, variety of different experiences. I definitely disagree. Of course, each person and each family has to make the best decision for themselves. And if you're going to be in the room, you should only be in the room if you can be helpful. So if you're going to get too overwhelmed or too emotional, or you can't handle seeing things, or being part of that process, then maybe you shouldn't be in there in that case, or you should be aware of that. So you're a support there. You're only going to be there if you're going to be helpful. But I do think that it's an important experience for the father to be in the room and part of the process of the delivery, and being there with their partner to get through it, because I think it's really important, very meaningful. And I'm so grateful that I was there. It was definitely hard. Again, nothing compared to what my wife went through, but it's a lot to experience. But I'm very, very grateful that I was there, and it even makes me feel bonded to Keon even more because I got to be there, when he was delivered and through that whole process. But yeah, then you have this baby, and now you're trying to figure things out. And yeah, I remember feeling very nervous and anxious about everything, from holding him and making sure he's okay, and making sure we do everything we need for him, changing his diapers. He was so little and fragile. And it's funny, he wasn't a very small baby as far as newborns go, but he was still tiny. So, like a bigger newborn is still a very, very tiny thing. And so, yeah, that was amazing, exciting. It's such a blur. Barely sleeping. I mean, the whole year sleep has been less, but that those first weeks and months was really tough because it was just this kind of like a 90-minute cycle of, eat, change, sleep. And by the time you're done with all that, he has to wake up again to eat. So even at nights, we're barely getting any sleep. I remember experiences like you're going to bed at like 12:30 and setting an alarm for like 1:15 or something, because we had to make sure he ate I forgot if it was 3 hours, or definitely don't quote me on any of these kinds of things. But anyway, that was a whole crazy, beautiful experience. You're sleep deprived, and it's such an interesting thing, because I was thinking of how you've never slept less in your life, but yet you never have had to do something as important as this. So it's like when you're tasked to do the most important thing you've ever done in your life, is when you're the most sleep deprived you've ever been, which is not a great combination, but there really isn't any other way for that to happen. So yeah, there's that was going on, and life was kind of a blur, and you're just so focused on him, and you're just worried about so many things. His poop should be this color or not, or is he doing this too much or too little, and just so focused on everything that he is doing. But yeah, it was a really beautiful experience, and you start to bond with him. One thing I'll also say, I mentioned that first time he woke up and going to take care of him. We talk about attachment, this feeling of this emotional connection that human beings we feel with loved ones, that we could feel for our kids, we could feel for our parents. It's a symbiotic kind of relationship, and also we could feel for people that we get emotionally very close to. Let's say a significant other, even other family members as well. But you could build these attachment bonds, and as much as, of course, I mentioned wanting to be a father my whole life, and then my wife was pregnant for 9 months. Like, you're already bonding in some ways with the idea of a child or of the child, but then the baby is there, and it almost can sound bad to say it, but you don't really, and I can say I didn't, but feel an attachment to him yet. I already had the sense of extreme care, as I mentioned, this care and kind of with it some anxiety of making sure you take care of him and he's okay. But I didn't have the sense of attachment yet. And that makes sense. And I say this also because often people can even feel guilty about this lack of attachment, or this lack of feeling, where it's like, okay, yeah, this is a baby, it is my baby. I already feel all these feelings, but I also don't necessarily have this sense of attachment yet. And that can feel weird. Like, shouldn't I be attached to my baby? But it takes a little bit of time to develop, and it definitely can. And especially moms can get even more grief for this, both internally and also from others, because as the mom, there's the sense that your maternal instinct, and you should already feel it, and you should have all these great feelings. And also, a lot of women can get a lot of guilt for postpartum blues or depression, because there's a sense of, oh, you should be so happy, you just had a baby, that's the most joyful and beautiful experience of life. What's wrong with you? Why are you not only feeling joy? When even if you don't have more severe, let's say, postpartum depression or strong postpartum blues, you're still feeling a whole range of emotions. And also physically, you just went through probably the most difficult experience of your life, and hormonally, and so many things are going on. So this expectation that you should just be feeling good and grateful and happy and joy, unfortunately, is an unrealistic expectation. It can leave a lot of people, especially the moms, feeling guilty or ashamed that they don't feel a certain way. But coming back to the attachment, that there isn't necessarily this automatic attachment that's born. We think, well, it's your kid. So yeah, of course, I already felt a huge responsibility. Wanted to make sure he was okay. I would do whatever I had to do for him. But it took some time to really feel that attachment bond. It took some time. I don't even know if I can say it, and it's not like it's like some kind of light switch or some binary thing that all of a sudden it turns on and it was off. But it did take at least a few, I think, days. I wish actually I kind of documented some of this stuff more closely. Again, there was just so much going on that would have been hard to find the time, or to remember to do those things. But yeah, it took some time to feel that, and so that's pretty natural. So I say that, so if you have ever gone through that, or if you're going to go through it, you recognize that that's not because there's something wrong with you or something wrong with what's going on. It's just the way these things go, that attachment does take some time to build before the baby is just like an idea, or you imagine the baby and you already feel this love or this excitement or this connection. That part makes sense, but it'll take some time to actually form that kind of bond with the baby. So I remember having that sense of, it took some time for that to be there. But yeah, you already, the baby can't do much. I remember when my cousin had twins, he's like, yeah, they eat, they poop and sleep. And that's kind of it. Especially those first days, they're not even smiling or responding to you in any way. But it's just, this process of just keeping them alive and enjoying this cute ball of mush. I remember he would just do some really cute things, like he would fall asleep, drinking his milk, And then I would try to burp him, and he'd just make these very cute sounds, like almost like purring sounds, like a little cat. But he kind of would make these sweet sounds when he was asleep, and I'd try to burp him, which was always hard because he'd become so soft and mushy, and it was hard to get his back straight to burp him. And I remember those days. But I used to love doing that. That was kind of one of my roles, was to be the burper. I probably never got very good at it, but I still like to hold him and pat his back, and just hold him for a bit. But yeah, those early days were, um, every part of it has its own challenges, but those were just this, especially as first time parents, like, okay, can I do this? Or how do you do this? Or how do you make sure he's okay? Or is he okay? Is this okay? Um, I remember putting him in the car seat for the first time. Gosh, especially, I don't know if we got a picture. I wish we did. Maybe we did. But he's just so tiny, and you're like, is he okay? Is it tight? Is it safe? Is it, all that stuff? Even putting the car seat in, I remember doing that before he was born, and there's just so much anxiety, like, am I doing this right? Of course you always care when you're building something or putting something together, but this is, had this kind of pressure on it that your baby is literally going to be in this thing. And so I remember so much stress about making sure that was okay. I think I even asked a friend to check it, like on FaceTime. But yeah, just making sure, driving him home. I still remember that, driving very slow. Thankfully, our drive was short, so it wasn't something that I had to, spend a lot of time with that. But yeah, getting him home and making sure he was okay. And then now you feel the sense of, at the hospital, as much as there's difficulties and discomforts, all sorts of things that you're dealing with, at least you feel the support of the staff that's there, and nurses and doctors, that in case anything goes wrong, they're there to take care of you, and most importantly, take care of the baby. But then you get home and it's just you, and it's tough. We had grandmas there, so that helped, but still, there is this different feeling. I remember, like, oh my gosh, now it's just on us. No one's there to take care of him other than us, and you feel that weight and that sense of responsibility. But let's get to it. Another commercial break here. I guess I'm still at the birth, pretty much just a few days into it, but we'll keep going on, I promise. Let's go to a commercial break. We'll be right back. Welcome back. I've been reflecting on 1 year of fatherhood, as our son Keon turned a year old just a few days ago. And I was getting into bringing the baby home and that whole experience. And yeah, then it's every phase has different things you worry about or you're trying to do. And, you're going to doctor's appointments again now with the baby out, different types of appointments, with still with concern and hoping that everything's okay every time you go in. And especially those first weeks and months, the baby is so fragile. There's this strange sense that they're very robust and resilient newborns, but also, of course, still very fragile. And so you're just worried. And talking to people and ChatGPT and Google and every resource you can find to make sure everything is okay. You're always just looking for that reassurance. Like, is this okay? That's kind of the main thing you're trying to do. It's not even about making sure things are amazing or good. It's just, is my baby okay? Is everything okay? And having that feeling repeatedly. But yes, intense and extreme sleep deprivation was the experience. And big part of like life becomes just trying to take care of everything. But as I mentioned, changing your identity and changing your experience, and that, as I mentioned before, a big part of your life now and your focus and how you see yourself and what you're doing is to make sure this baby is okay. And I think moms go through this even earlier than dads because of the pregnancy, but even your own pain or discomfort, it changes its value because of the baby, and that you're so much more concerned with the baby's well-being that you could feel differently about your own pain or experience. You feel this early on, but I remember, I think I shared this experience now close to a year ago. But I remember one of the first times one of his nails kind of scratched me, and he was very, very young, like, within the first month, I would say. And it was very sharp and it kind of hurt. And you have to kind of be careful. Often you have the baby wear cute little gloves while they sleep, or, they're usually in a swaddler, so their hands are restrained in some ways because you don't want them to scratch themselves, and they could, and it can hurt them, or they can, scratch their eye or do certain things. And so what was interesting was I felt this scratch on my face, and it hurt, but I didn't feel the physical pain so much as I felt the worry for him scratching himself. And so it was interesting, in the moment I felt some things, but I reflected on it. It was just the more it hurt, the more I was worried rather than feeling more pain really internally or that experience of pain. It was more just this thought or worry of, oh my gosh, he could do this to himself. Imagine if he scratched himself like that. That's so bad. And I was, in general responsible for trying to get his nails, which we kind of had one of those, a buffer kind of thing, which we still use because I don't know, for me to clip would have been too scary, or use scissors, which I know a lot of people do. I think would have just been too scary to do. So we had that, but so that was like this sense of responsibility. Oh, I need to take care of him. But it was just interesting that the pain didn't register so much as pain as it did worry about him in this almost instantaneous kind of way. And so there's this clear sense of your own pain or discomfort changing value. Whereas generally, I mean, of course, if you're married, you will hopefully have that for your partner as well. But you're often thinking of your own, how am I feeling? How am I doing? Does this hurt me? And that kind of thing. But when you become a parent, all of a sudden, your pain is less important than your baby's pain, and it just you start to feel that instantly and automatically. You're rocking them to sleep, and you might get in an uncomfortable position. You're like, okay, but I'm just gonna have to hold this position for some time, or what could I do? Or I remember him falling asleep, and I was holding him, and water, if saliva go down the wrong tube, and you have the strong sensation to cough because you feel like you're choking, even though you're okay. And so I got to experience it. Oh yeah, it just passes the feeling. As hard as it is, you're kind of like having this strong urge of your body saying, cough, cough. You have to get this, out. But you just fight that urge, and eventually turns out it goes away. But it's interesting just having these experiences where and these are smaller ones, there's obviously a lot bigger ones too, where you're just trying to, make sure this baby is okay. And those sacrifices start to begin in a variety of ways, but even some that in a way can be humorous. But yeah, you realize that your experience of your own pain or your own comfort definitely changes its value or its significance. And this baby becomes the most important thing. Is the baby okay? How do I make sure he's okay and he's doing all right? And that's, I think, a big way that you change in parenthood. And I think it's a very good one. It creates this almost sense of selflessness that you can, have to be able to put yourself second, definitely not first anymore. And I think that is good when it's done in a healthy way. You also are just so worried about your baby, your child being okay. And unfortunately, even the worst of thoughts come to your mind because of that. And also just your ability to experience empathy changes. So let me make that, I'll say it another way. Your heart almost opens a different chamber, because if you become a parent. One, and just the love you feel is a type of love that is different than you feel for anyone else, even, being in love. It's different than the love you have for your child. So it's a different type of experience of love that you have, an intensity of love and a certain type of love. And it's really, I think, beautiful and incredible. And just your preoccupation with them being okay is so intense. It's just so much gets tied in together. And so because of this, and I'm obviously these like metaphorical types of things, this new chamber of your heart that opens up emotionally, it allows you to have a different experience of empathy for other parents and their experiences with their children. So if you ever asked me, even before I became a father, I would have said, without a doubt, the worst pain or relational pain that a human being can experience is the loss of a child. Really at any age, but of course at different ages, it'll have different types of experiences for the individual, for the parent. So I always, kind of knew that in the logical, and I would feel it too. So there was an emotion behind it. So that it's not like that was a surprise for me. But the way you feel it when you have your own child changes. The intensity, even the ability to almost empathize, because now that you have your own child, although it's still imagining it, you can't say you know exactly what it's like, obviously, but you can empathize in a different way, because it could feel even more real, because the loss can feel more real of what you would lose becomes more real. And so my although I was always so heartbroken when I hear any story of anyone who'd lost a child, it became a new level now. Or even seeing something happening to children, always very, very painful. I've loved, children and babies since I was very young myself. Um, so that was always there, but it becomes a new level of intensity. And so it made me realize there's at times politicians, of course, they're always focusing on the messaging and the branding, but sometimes they'll say things that sounds wrong. You'll hear a male politician say something to the effect of, I really care about women's rights. I have two daughters at home. And what can sound weird about that is that people can hear that, oh, you wouldn't care about women's rights if you didn't have daughters, or it was only because you have these two daughters that you care about women's rights. That almost doesn't sound good. We would want you to care about women anyway, no matter what, to have that feeling for them. And yes, that's the case. If you wouldn't have cared about, let's say, women's rights in this issue until you had your own daughters, that would be sad. But what I think they mean, if I give a favorable or charitable understanding of what they might be saying, is that I feel the intensity or the importance of this in a very deep way because of, so I feel it even more strongly. I would have cared anyway. I think it's important, but I want you to understand that I get the depth of it because of that, this experience. And so the same kind of thing, that it wasn't that I wouldn't have cared before. I would have always thought it's the most devastating thing someone can go through. I've had to work with many people, or I could say got the opportunity, but it's obviously very painful for them. And it's just very intense stuff to work through. People who've lost their child, and it was always just something devastating and very emotionally intense. And I should say, maybe not, but, and it gets more intense once you have a child and you recognize that. So that was something interesting that I could have imagined that too, that could happen. But then when you experience it, you feel it, there's obviously nothing like that. And then you feel that difference. And so now when I see something about children in some kind of pain or suffering, I do feel it even more strongly. I used to feel it very strongly before. I remember being a kid, and if there was a commercial showing children in poverty or suffering, my parents would change it because they knew I would get emotional watching it. So it's not something that I didn't feel before, but you just feel it in a different kind of way, a different depth of pain, and of that experience comes about. So it's another way that you change, is that your experience of empathy and care changes. And I think those are positive changes, that you care even more for all others. I think many people have this experience that when you have your own child, your love for all the children in the world increases or becomes even stronger. So again, you would always think it matters. I always thought it did matter, but it's gotten even stronger to see children suffering or pain, or hearing the stories, or imagine what the families are going through. You feel it in a different way. There's different intensity. So you love your child, but even through your child and seeing a baby and feeling that connection, seeing who they are, what they go through, you experience something quite differently than you could have without that experience. And I totally get that. I would hear that before, people saying in different ways, oh, just wait till you have your own kids and you'll see what you'll feel and how it's different. And I think that's true. But yeah, you really can't know until you actually go through that. But coming back to my own child and what I've gone to experience, you then experience the beautiful pain of watching your baby grow up, which I've alluded to many times. We've talked about on the show a bunch, because I think it's a very strong feeling of, all you want is for your child to be healthy and to keep growing and to be strong and, everything good in that way. So you want them to grow, of course. If that didn't happen, you'd be heartbroken and devastated. But it's also very sad to see them grow and to see that you're losing something too, or losing those different stages or phases that were there before. And that can be very painful. And this is also an experience that I think almost all parents can relate to, of this beautiful pain of watching your children grow. That you want it so much and you're so happy, and it's so beautiful to see the growth and progress and how they change. but also there's the sadness there, a bittersweet feeling that comes with it as well. And so I definitely experienced that, seeing him um, grow, the new milestones, that he can do. Of course, some of them are so beautiful when they can first smile at you. It's just so amazing to have that level of just even response. You don't really get much response, it's just physical, unless you count farting or peeing as a response. You really just get those burps and things like that. But then when you first get those, first they're involuntary smiles, so they're probably not smiling really, but just the face makes that kind of reaction or that expression. But once you start having those interactions, it's really a beautiful thing. And so that was really fun and really exciting. And I continue to enjoy that. So as I was saying, there's that beautiful pain of watching them grow. It's so nice that as he's gotten older, the ways I can interact with him have increased and improved, and we can play and he can smile and he can dance and he can, react to things and, laugh at things. It's just so beautiful. And so that's something that I really enjoy about watching him grow, is that the ways that we can engage and interact continue to grow, which is just amazing and incredible. I'm so grateful for all of that and for those experiences with him. And all you want to do is do the best for them. And what I think I'll talk about in the last segment is the challenges of being a parent, and that you're obviously doing your best. Something that it's kind of cliche, but we say all the time that everyone's trying their best, but you still get things wrong. And so I know that in this year, I hope I've done a lot of good, but I know I've made a lot of mistakes and a lot of challenges, and that your own issues come up inevitably when you are a parent, and you try your best to be more conscious of it, but you can't avoid that. You want to just try to minimize that. So I'll talk a bit about some of those challenges as well in the last segment after the break. We'll be right back. Welcome back. In this last few segments, I've been reflecting on this 1 year of fatherhood and what it's been like. And I did talk about some challenges in between, and just how hard it could be and different things I've gone through. But I also want to make sure this last segment, I talked about, these deeper emotional challenges or experiences that also come up when you become a parent. Again, this is something that I've thought about and talked about before experiencing it. I understood it makes sense that your own stuff is going to come up when you become a parent. Your own experiences as a child, your own experiences seeing your parents, what they did, what you liked, didn't like, all sorts of things is going to impact how you are as a parent. So I always got that, but you experience it in a different way once you actually experience it. You don't experience it until you go through it. And so that's been interesting to see. And I have to be, real with myself. I might not get into all the depths of it because there's so many layers to it of things I'm noticing about myself and things I want to be aware of, because the last thing you want to do is to pass on any of your negative stuff to your kid. That's something you feel. You just see this beautiful, innocent, pure child, when you look at your baby, and even I see him in the ways he's having fun now, and I'm like, it's so beautiful, his joy for life, and just he wants to enjoy things and have a good time, his curiosity. And I think it's sad that the world might take some of that away, as it often does. It kind of make us lose some of that. It can. But more importantly, I want to make sure I don't do that, or I at least minimize the ways that I take some of that away from him, or take any of that away from him, because that would be such a shame, and I'd feel so horrible, and I definitely don't want to do that. But I know it's hard not to have that happen at some level. So we can't be perfect people. That's impossible. We can't have perfect childhoods. And even if we do, years of therapy and all sorts of inner work, we can't just remove every wound and scar and, thing that we experience. So that's just not possible. And these things, of course, are not black and white. So we should do those things as much as we can, because the more you work on those things, the better. I'm just making the point that we never get to the point where now we can parent and not worry about our stuff affecting our kids because we've dealt with all of it. It just doesn't happen. It's just not possible. I know there was a great book that I read many years ago now, Parenting from the Inside Out, and one of the authors was Daniel Siegel. And I really liked that book and that perspective or philosophy of realizing that you have to know your own stuff because and you know the title there, parenting from the inside out, is like recognizing your own stuff so that you parent with that awareness or that acknowledgement, or you know, knowing who you are and what you are and what you went through, because that's going to impact who you are as a parent. So the more aware you are of your own stuff, the better you can do, or the more you can minimize the negative impacts, and that can help. So that is really important. We want to be self-reflective for ourselves, but then when you become a parent, there's also that added dimension of now you're going to be responsible or passing on things to your child, and so you want to make sure you don't, you know, you minimize the negative ways that that does happen. So you know, I think I've talked about you know the worries you have as a parent, the concerns, but I could see that I might be over worried at times. I might be over concerned about certain things, and you know certain ways that I'm, you know, of what's happening to him. Is he okay? What is happening to him, and all that kind of a thing. So that's something I'm trying to be you know, be aware of. But I think also these things, they get harder as a child grows, because when the baby is very very young, when the baby is very, you know, just a baby, there's not much that you can do, or you know, as far as emotional things, just be aware of how you handle things, and of course even how calm you are, how at peace you are, is going to affect things. You know, your child will feel that, your tension, or your, you know, anxiety. So it doesn't matter. But I think as the child gets older and we're getting into that more, there's more of an emotional dynamic at play where the child's feelings are brought up and you have to respond to them, and how you respond to them matters, and how they see you, you know, respond matters. And so it does get tough, because it's not easy. Your child is going to want to do things that you can't let them do. And how do you help them? How do you set boundaries? How do you say no to them about certain things that, you know, you don't want to say no, but you have to protect them from whatever it might be. You know, first of all, you want to try to create an environment where you don't have to say no to them much. So, you know, you don't want to put toys that they can't play with, or things, objects in their way that are not safe for them, because then they go for them, you have to tell them no. So you try to remove them, child-proof the house, do all those kinds of things. But still, you know, things will come up where you're not at your home, you go somewhere, and you're going to have to say no or do certain things. And it's tough. I've already had that happen with him. It's very sweet, but in a way sad, because he kind of goes like, no, no, no. He kind of will look at me, and he kind of gets it when I say, okay, that's something we don't touch. And I don't want to, you know, him to think of me and no, or as someone who's telling him no a lot at all. So I'm trying to be aware of that, but it's difficult. And I know I'm just at the very, very, very beginning of that, of him, you know, wanting to do things that we're going to have to say no, of him pushing boundaries, of, you know, tantruming and all the things that are going to come with it. And I know it's not going to be easy. And I hope that when I've worked with parents and talked about parenting on this show, I tried to have the humility and be, you know, understanding of how difficult it is. I'm sure I've missed the mark sometimes, or maybe thought it was easier than it is. But I hope I was, because I recognize that I know it's going to be very, very difficult. You know, it can be easy to talk about and just to say what's the best thing to do, but actually executing it in the moment when you have a child crying, or when you're dealing with a stressful situation, is not easy at all. And I can totally get that. It's why I would even try to really emphasize this to parents, because they would talk about something that I maybe gave a suggestion, like, oh yeah, you're so right, I should have done that. Why didn't I think of that? And I was like, well, you know, I'm sitting in, you know, my comfortable chair with nothing to worry about, and I'm just reflecting and giving you some perspective. It's very easy to do that. It's a lot harder when your kid is tantruming and you have to get out of the house at a certain time to not be late for this and that, and you know, you're dealing with the actual stresses of life. So yeah, I'm trying to get myself ready, but I know it's going to be tough, and I want to yeah, do the best that I can for him. And I know that involves learning things and techniques, but also learning even more about myself, that seeing what I do and how I do certain things. And I think, as you know, we talk about co-parenting, often the term that's used after divorce, but really, you know, you're always co-parenting if you have another parent, even if you're in the same home and married. But as co-parents, you really can support each other a lot in this. Hopefully you have a good enough dynamic where the conversation can be free flowing, but you'll notice things in each other that the other person will be blind to, and I've already experienced that, where I don't realize I'm maybe, mentioning something so many times that I'm worried about it, or I'm overly focused on something, or whatever it is that I'm doing. And my wife can help me see that better than I can see myself, which is another reminder of however much we work on ourselves and become self-reflective and all those things, we're still going to have blind spots all the time. And especially when things get more intense and when things get more important, those blind spots get bigger. And especially when they start to touch on our own deeper stuff, because we have a harder time seeing those things. So I think even if this work comes or starts before you're a parent, but try to understand yourself and understand your own childhood, understand your own parents, their personalities, personality types, the ways they did things, and really actually look at it. Because when you're a kid, however your parents are, for a lot of your life, it can just seem like that's just the way it is. That's how it, there's nothing different from this. But then as you get older, you start to realize, like, wait, that it didn't have to be like that, or there's other ways to do things, and what my mom and dad did. And so with that can come the perspective that I can do things differently too. And that's really important, because even though often we go through, something as a kid, and then once we become aware of it, oh, I never want to do that again. We know that unfortunately the most likely tendency is that you will repeat the past that you experienced, that what you experience, you will at some level pass on to your kids in that direct way. The other thing that can happen, and we're making it more black and white because it's obviously more complex, but another big dynamic that can happen is you might swing the other way too much in an unhealthy way. So, I was talking about saying no, but if your parents said no to you and you feel like they always said no, you might want to become a parent that never says no, or never sets any boundaries. And that's also not healthy. A point that I always think is important to repeat is that the opposite of something unhealthy is also unhealthy. If a room is too cold, making it too hot doesn't make it good. You need to find that balance or that equilibrium. So if your parents always said no, always saying yes and never saying no is not healthy either. You have to find that balance. And so we want to be aware of those wounds or those scars, because sometimes we'll want to make sure our kid never feels the way that we did. So we can go to an extreme to try to avoid that. I remember what it felt like when my parents said no. I never want my kid to feel that. But you might be, because of that, neglecting to set appropriate boundaries or help them learn that they won't always get what they want in the world and in life. That actually isn't good for them. So again, that opposite of the unhealthy thing you experienced in childhood isn't necessarily going to be a healthy thing. And you want to be very, very aware of that. But if you don't think about things or reflect on it, you won't see it, and you might just jump right in and start to do things a certain way. So becoming a parent has definitely changed me and changed my identity and, all those kinds of things. But it's also helped me, I'm just starting the process, but learn even more about myself and who I am, or even myself as a person, as a child, as now a parent, in ways that I, even though had gone to, years of therapy, reflected on these things, hadn't become aware of until I was put in this situation. So it starts before you become a parent, but it definitely is not something you can finish preparing for and then now you're ready to go. It's definitely an ongoing process. And speaking on that, you can never be prepared to be a parent. You get as ready as you can, but you can't be ready for it. It's just, an experience that you can only see what it's like once you're there. And once you're there, it's already started. You're already in it. So that's been interesting too, that a lot of what I think I understood about myself and about parenting, I see how difficult or how different it is. And that's been also tough and challenging, but also insightful. And I hope to continue to go through that, but also grow through that. But yeah, it's definitely been tough. Anything I've done lots of things that I think I could have done better. You reflect on that. You don't want to let your kid down. I think when you see a baby, you see how, as I was saying, innocent and pure and good they are. And, they deserve nothing but good. And you want to be the best you can be for them. But, we're imperfect and we're trying our best to help them to be the best parents that we can be. And so to finish up for today, I'm very grateful to be a father now, to have that experience. It really is the most beautiful and meaningful experience of my life. And I'm just so grateful to my wife, first and foremost, for being my co-parent through all this, but of course, uh, pregnancy and the birth and everything she's done since then is really incredible to see her as a mom doing everything that she's done. And also so grateful to Keon for being the reason I am a father. And I'm so lucky to be his dad. I told him the other day, he doesn't know what I'm saying, but I looked at him and I said, no one deserved to be your dad. I'm just so lucky I'm the one that got to be that undeserving one, because I'm just so lucky. You're just so good. And he really is just like so incredible. His joy for life. I really look at it. I'm like, oh, I have a lot to learn from you. He's just so excited to start every day. He's so fun and happy and wants to have a good time. And I'm just so lucky to be his father. And I can't wait to see him as he continues to grow and to connect with him in the deeper and more meaningful ways that I can as he gets older. But I could talk about it forever, but I'll have to wrap up here. So I'll stop there. But I love you, Keon, and Daddy's always here for you. All right, that brings us to the end of today's show. A big thank you to Farid in the studio. You've been listening to In Session with Dr. Farid Holakouee, free Iran.